Guys, welcome back to the channel, Nate's Pink Bookshelf. My name is Nate Denise for those of you who are new to the channel or who just happen to stumble across this video. And as the title says, this is going to be a book review, and I have not done a book review in a long time. I think I previously did them years ago, but I stopped doing them because I wasn't sure how I wanted to go about doing my review videos, because I don't want to be vague on information, but I also don't want to give too much information as to spoil the stories for you guys. So I figured, since I have been using the call pal system created by G from the Book Roast, just click the I to go to her video about that system. I decided to use that as a means to really get into my video reviews, especially when it comes to fantasy novels. I do read a lot more fantasy books, so I figured this would be the best way for me to actually sit and do my reviews. I also have a notebook that I've been using to actually write down my basic thoughts. So like I said, I'm going to be using the Cawpile system, which is CAWPILE, and each letter obviously means something. So I'm not going to go in the order of how it's written. I'm actually going to talk about writing first, then we're going to discuss the characters. We're then going to go into atmosphere, which is pretty much world building. We'll talk about the plot, and then I'll just give you guys my thoughts as far as intrigue, logic, and enjoyment. So that is how we are going to do it, and there's not a lot on here, so it's going to be like a quick review. I don't want my reviews to be more than 20 minutes long, but I also want to give enough information, especially with this series, because the series is very complex. It's a very complex series. So the book that I'm talking about is going to be The Ruin of Kings by Miss Jenn Lyons, which, let me just say, I love this book so much. This book is phenomenal, but this is book one. The series is called A Chorus of Dragons. It's going to be a 5-book series. Right now they are up to book 3. So book 1 is The Ruin of Kings. I have read this book now twice already, and if you think I'm joking, I have my ARC copy here that I received when I did a blog tour, so you guys can see I did tab up the ARC. And then I got this baby because I'm also a part of the blog tour for book 3, so I did get a finished copies of books 1 and 2, which I read both already. So book 1 is all tabbed up. Okay, so book 2 is The Name of All Things, which I did definitely enjoy. I still prefer book 1 over book 2, but I did enjoy it. I gave it a 4-star rating. I will have a separate review for this coming, but I thoroughly enjoyed this as much as well, and you guys can see all of my tabs. So the covers are really, really nice as well and simplistic. The third book in the series is going to be The Memory of Souls, which actually just came out. I will be starting this book tomorrow, which I am so excited to start because the end of book 2 killed me, and I need more of Kieran and Janelle and the crew, which I'll talk about soon. But yeah, this is book 3 in the series, and I also did receive this from the publishing company for review for the blog tour. Okay, so I set the books up here so you guys can see a little bit better, but we are going to get into this. Like I said, you will see me looking down because I do have some points that I definitely want to make sure I discuss. But as I said, the first book is The Ruin of Kings. It is book 1 in A Chorus of Dragons, which is going to be a 5-book series, and it is an adult epic fantasy. This is not a YA. I believe they marketed the first book as like /YA adult. It is not YA at all. I would not recommend this to teenagers unless they are into fantasy. This is also not a book for fantasy beginners. If you are new to the fantasy genre, I would say don't read this because of how it's written and the complexity of the story. I will say most of my fantasies, I do little index cards and like take notes to keep track of things outside of my regular annotating. But this is definitely going to be a book you will probably need index cards on because there's a large cast of characters. So now I'm briefly just going to read the synopsis that I got from Tor, the publishing company, and then we'll get into my thoughts and review. So it says, there are old stories and then there's what actually happens. Kieran is a bastard orphan who grew up on storybook tales of long-lost princes and grand quests. When he is claimed against his will as a long-lost son of a treasonous prince, Kieran finds that being a lost prince isn't what the storybooks promised. And I am actually going to stop there because it's a lot more complex than that, which is why I'm doing this review. So to start off with the writing. So when it comes to the Cawpile system, you do everything from a 1 to 10, and then you divide all the numbers by 7 since there's 7 letters, 7 categories. And so for the writing, I gave it a 9 out of 10 because I thoroughly enjoyed everything about the writing. So the one thing to note about this book is that it's not a linear story whatsoever. The writing for this is very it could be polarizing in a sense. So you have three points of views. You have Talon, who is one of the main characters. You have Kieran, who is obviously the protagonist of the story. And then you have the footnotes written by a third character. So if you are not a fan of like Nevernight and how they had the footnotes, you might not enjoy this because there are footnotes in this. Just saying. But this is told with three POVs. And what I mean that it's not a linear story is that you have the two main POVs, which are Talon and Kieran, telling the story from two distinct points in Kieran's life. So Kieran starts off from the moment that he is a slave, and then Talon starts the story prior to that when he is just living his normal life as a thief. And then you have the third person POV, which I'm not going to say the person's name because the person is actually essential to the story, but you have the third person POV who is basically giving his input into the two storylines. So you have these storylines that they pretty much meet at the end to a generalized part in the story, but it starts off with two different beginnings. All of it is obviously on Kieran, who's the main character, but you're seeing different parts of Kieran's life that leads up to the part where they generally meet to then continue on in the story. Hopefully that makes sense. So it's kind of like there's two flashbacks, but one is like a flashback to like when Kieran was a slave, when he started out as a slave, and then the other flashback is like way back prior to that when he was first a thief. So hopefully that made sense. It's hard to explain because it can definitely be a bit complex, but I hope that makes sense. Okay, as far as like the writing is pretty easy to follow. You don't get confused. You definitely can just fly through the writing because the way that Jenn writes is very lyrical and poetic, and nothing seems out of place. At least for me, I didn't find that she was over descriptive or under descriptive. I didn't find that the dialogues or the inner dialogue was too long or too short. Everything was pretty much evenly paced for me. So I thoroughly enjoy that. Anything else? This book does touch on death, family, slavery, and I believe sexuality as well. I will say this series definitely has some LGBTQ plus IA rep in it, and I love it. I can't get into too much detail because it does spoil some of the characters, so just know that there is LGBTQ plus IA rep in this, and I love it, and you see it even more so in book 2. So pretty much like I said, for writing I gave it a 9. I thoroughly enjoyed the writing so much. As far as characters, now this is where it can be complex. Okay, the characters and the plot can be a lot. So there's about over 10 characters, and when I say characters, I mean not like just minor characters. Like each of these characters are essential to the storyline. Okay, so you have Kieran. Now we start off with Kieran when he's about 15 going on 16 years old. So because the story is told from Kieran's perspective and it's about Kieran, it can read a little childish, which I've noticed when I've seen other people's reviews or like video reviews. A lot of people said they didn't like Kieran because of how childish he was. But keep in mind, Kieran is only 15 going on 16 years old, so it's obvious he's going to be childish. It's obvious he's going to have a teen's sort of mindset. He's going to be very playful, and he's going to make dumb decisions. He is a teen, and I think that was the thing that I loved about Kieran, is that he stayed true to his teenage years. You know, he didn't allow the situations or the things that happened to sort of force him to grow up. He still made dumb decisions. He still was very snarky, and I loved it about Kieran. Kieran is literally my favorite character. He is very comical. He is very just laid back, and he does dumb stuff. Like, it is what it is. He's a dumb character, but I love him. Then you have Talon, who is the sort of second POV within the story, and she is a mimic. I'm not going to talk more about what that is because it will spoil some things, but she is a mimic, and a mimic is basically someone who can change their being. Like, they can, it's like a changeling in a sense. So that's what Talon is. Then you have Relos Var, who is a powerful wizard. I got feelings about Relos Var, especially since I read the sequel and now I can't stand him even more. But Relos Var is not really he's essential to the story, but he's not like 100% essential until book 2 when you get his portion of the story. So we have him. Then you have Terath, I think that's how you say his name, is Terath. Don't know, it's on the screen. And he is a hunter of Thane and an assassin, and Thane is one of the goddesses. There are different gods and goddesses in this world, which I will talk about in a few, but he specifically worships Thane. And then you have Kamezra, Commisera. I think that's how you say her name. Now, let me just say, these names can be a little hard to pronounce. That's why I do listen to the audiobooks while I'm reading, so just note that. But Commisera, I'm reading it off my notes. She is Tarath's mother, and she's also the leader of the Black Brotherhood. The Black Brotherhood is pretty much the secret society of assassins, pretty much, in a sense. And she's a high priestess of Thane. Then you have Darzin, who... Darzin Damon is basically the guy that claims to be the father of Karen. Karen was originally raised in the slums as the son of a musician, and he worked at, I don't want to say a whorehouse because I don't really know what else to say it, but he worked at a whorehouse doing music, and he basically was found, and they told him that, you know, all the stuff he knew all his life was a lie. His father and the woman that sort of raised him named Ola both knew the truth but refused to tell him the truth, so it's pretty much him figuring out everything. But Darzin Damon is basically the lord heir of the Damon house. There are 12 houses, which I'll talk about in a few, but he is the one that pops in and says, hey, I'm your, you know, your long lost daddy. There is actually more to it than that, but I'm gonna leave it there. Then you have Thurvashar, who is the lord heir to the Dolores house. He's also an essential character, which I can't really talk about because it will spoil a lot of things. Then you have the three goddesses. So you have Thane, who is the goddess of death. So Tarath and Commisera both worship the goddess of death. You have Taja, who is the goddess of luck, and then you have Taya, who is the goddess of magic. Then you have a dragon in this. There are real live dragons. Real live dragons. Like, I love dragons, so just know. Dragons are in this story. Apparently, there are 9 dragons total, but in this story, you're only meeting one of the dragons. And his name is Sharanikal. He is a male fire dragon. And the last character is Sayenso, who is a sea witch, who is essential to the story in a very interesting way. So, as you can see, there's a lot of characters, okay? Lots of characters to focus on. So with me, I don't use index cards with this series, which I probably should. I just write in my book. I do a lot of annotating. So just know, if you're going to read this, there are thousands of characters to keep track of. And it is essential that you keep track of these characters, because I'm telling you now, book 2 will blow your mind with characters that you honestly forgot in book 1 that are essential to the actual plot of the story. Yeah, but characters, I gave characters a 8 just because there was like a lot of characters to keep track of. One, and some of the characters I didn't really care about, honestly. There's like a group of people called the Thriss people, I think, and they're like snake people. I don't really care about them too much, so like there's a lot to the story that you have to keep track of. So that's why I gave characters an 8. So moving on to atmosphere, which is world building. So for this, I gave it an 8 because I feel like there's so much more to the world than what is told to us in the story, especially in book 1. There are 5 races to the world. So you have the Vane, which the Vane are pretty much, they remind me of Fae. They're very beautiful creatures, but you have 2 types of Vane. You have the Mano Vane and then the Crippus Vane, I think that's how you say it. Basically, you have the black skin Vane and the white skin Vane, pretty much, but all Vane are very beautiful creatures. Then you have the Wardrits, which are dwarves. You have the demons, of course. You have the humans, and you have the Morage. Those are kind of like savage humans in a sense, I guess. And the core empire is what it is, and you have Dotar and Manal, or Manal, I believe, is like a jungle, if I'm not mistaken. But within the core empire, there's so many other parts, like Yor and Jorat, which I do appreciate book 2, because in book 2 you do get to see Jorat more often, but in book 1 you're really focusing on the core empire, where the different houses are. Now, as I said, there are 12 royal houses, and each royal house I think is really interesting because each royal house has a specific sort of animal symbol. They have specific characteristics, like with the Damon house, they have blue eyes. With the Dolores house, I believe they have like a specific color eyes. I think it's green. I will note that in the back of the book, and for the entire series, you have a few things. So you do get a glossary, which I love because there are some words that you're just like, what? And then you also get an appendix of the royal houses. So like I said, there are 12. So you have the House de Amarin, I think that's how you say that. And one thing I don't understand is why they all have a D in it. Like, they're all House de something. But you have one house who their eyes are particularly green, and they basically control a specific creature or thing within the world. So with them, they control the Krakens, and they monopolize on the gatekeepers, which are transportation and teleportations. You have House de Evelyn, which they have their gem, which is the amethyst. They are over cyclones. They have violet eyes, and they are pretty much over the Junk Boys now. The Junk Boys is essential to the story because it's pretty much what Karen started out as. Like I said, Karen started out as a thief at the very beginning of the story. He was a part of a sort of like thieves guild, which was the Junk Boys. You have, it's a lot of houses, so I'm not gonna go into all of them, but I will say House Dolores, their gem is onyx. They are known for the flowers. Their eyes are black, and they deal with a lot of magic. And then House Damon is the blue sapphire. Their sort of heraldic device is a hawk. Their eyes are blue, and they are the house of like healing and medical art. So you literally have a house that deals with specific things, smithing, and who deals with like crops, herbs, and teas and coffees. People who deal with animals, and people who are dealing with the revelers, and people who deal with slavery, and masons and carpentry. Like it's in here. And then also in the back is a rulings family of the Vane, which is very essential to the story because things can be confusing. I don't even know what else to say. Like it can be a very confusing series, a very confusing story, but because they have a glossary at the back on top of the family tree, on top of what each house is, it's pretty much easy to follow along with. But there, like I said, are 12 houses, and each represents something. The magic system is based on stones, life, gods, and sorcery, and I can't explain any further than that because it would kind of spoil some of the things that take place in book 1. But it's a very simplistic magic system, but it's very complex in explaining, and I hope that makes sense. But another thing I love is that this book touches, like I said, on the LGBTQ plus rep, and we are here for it all the way. One thing to note is that this book does talk about incest, and the reason behind that is to do with the plot. So I'm going to go ahead to plot, because in order for me to talk about the incest, I have to talk about the plot. So for plot, I gave that an 8. I pretty much was invested in the story. It can get confusing in some things. It seemed illogical at times and didn't make any sense, because it's like every time I got to a certain point where I was like, okay, I'm following along, Jenn somehow threw in a plot twist that kind of switched everything around. So plot for me definitely was an 8. So there's a magic artifact. I'm not going to specifically say what it is because it's important to the story, but there's a specific magic artifact, a stone in a sense, that allows for the swapping of bodies. And I can't really speak further on it because it would spoil a lot. But because of this artifact, this gemstone, whatever you want to call it, because of it, you can get confused with who is who, because there was a lot of killing and swapping of bodies and swapping of souls down the generations, that the people you think are who they are not who they are. And then on top of that, you have a changeling that can change into anybody, so it's also adding to the not really knowing who's who kind of situation. So it's literally a game of who's who in the story, which can get thoroughly confusing, but by the end of the story, you're pretty much knowing who is who. But yeah, there are multiple villains to the story because, like I said, you don't know who is who and who's on what side and who's doing what. So there are multiple villains for multiple reasons, and it wasn't until book 2 that I finally understood why there were multiple villains and who was like the good person and the bad person. There's one character I'm still on an if about, but yeah. It deals a lot with prophecies. There is this thing called I'm not going to pronounce it, the name is on the screen. These prophecies here, there are several of these prophecies that prophesy about this Ruin of Kings, which the title. I will say the book titles all match up with something that happens in the book, which I love. But the Ruin of Kings is a prophecy within the story that you finally figured out towards the end of the story what it meant. But we have that, and there's a lot of plot twists and secrets and revelations within this story that it can make it complex. I personally enjoyed it. I think it was very well written. Not many people can pull off the way that Jenn did the storyline. Not many people can pull off how she did the POVs with the footnotes and all of the plot twists that went on. Again, like I said, it can get confusing because there's a lot of soul switching and body swapping, which can make you be like, okay, what the heck is going on? But by the end of the story, you should be good to understand. This is why I would definitely suggest, if you are going to read the series, definitely keep a notebook, use some index cards, some sticky notes to write down your thoughts every few chapters. One thing I do like is that the chapters are not really long. Some chapters are long, some chapters are literally like a paragraph or a page or 2 pages. Some chapters maybe like 5, 7, 8 pages, but you're getting a lot from the story, and it can feel like an information overload, especially if you're not into fantasy, but I enjoyed it. So going into intrigue, definitely my intrigue was a 9, of course. Logic I said was an 8 because there were certain things, especially when it came to finding out about the soul swapping and who's soul swapped with what bodies and things like that. When I was able to figure out who swapped what bodies, a lot of the stuff that took place didn't really seem logical to me at all. I just some things I just was like, why? Because now that is kind of like null and void. But I will say, because I thought that I went into book 2 with specific mindsets, and that was quickly changed up. So it makes sense now that I read book 2, but when I first initially read book 1, I was like, the logic didn't make sense. And then my enjoyment was totally a 10. I thoroughly enjoyed this. So overall, my rating for this series is a 4.5 star rating. When I first read it, I did give it a 5 star because I thoroughly enjoyed it to the masses. Like thoroughly enjoyed it. But on my second reread with the finished copy, I did go with a 4.5, just because, like I said, some of the things that I thought made sense didn't make sense anymore after I was a little bit more critical with my reading. I will say this is very, very comical. This book will have you laughing from start to finish. This book had me hooked from start to finish. I was sold on a lot of the things that were taking place. I think Kieran is such a brilliant young kid, even though he is a teenager. Well, by the end of the story, he's about 20 years old. So I mean, you have 5 years with Kieran. You have 5 years of seeing how he interacts and how he grows. He is still petty. By the time he is 20, he is still childish in his ways and his mindsets by the time he is 20. But I mean, think about it. What 20-year-old is going to be set in knowing everything, especially when they find out the truth about their lineage and who they are? And I mean, he found out some really interesting things, which I can't really share because it would spoil the story. But Kieran is not just a long lost prince. He is a lot more than that. Finding out who his father is interesting. There is a little bit of a romance that does take place. There's actually like 3 romances that take place, which I'm here for. There is definitely some things I questioned after reading book 2 that I'm like interested to see where book 3 goes romance wise. But the main point of this story is Kieran has to figure things out. He has to figure out his life. He has to figure out who he is, what he is, and pretty much save the world in a sense. But it's hard to do when you have so many people lying to you. It's hard to do when there's so many body swappings because you don't know who you're talking to, who you're not talking to. But yeah, I hope this made sense. I hope I didn't confuse you even more. Just know this is a 5 out of 5. Well, 4.5 out of 5 for me. I will leave my written review, both of my written reviews, my original written review and then my second written review down below for you to have a better understanding of the story, because it is good. It is good, but there's a lot to it that I want to say, but I can't say because it would spoil the story. So, like I said, it's a very great fantasy novel. I don't care what anybody says. This novel was bomb.com to me. I like complex stories where I have to sit and write. I read Brandon Sanderson. Like, come on. If you read Brandon Sanderson, I think you might enjoy this. I've heard a lot of people say her writing is like Robin Hobb's. Not for me. I read Robin Hobb. Her writing is not like Robin Hobb for me. I will say the way that she does her plots are similar in a sense to Brandon Sanderson, but is not on the same level as Brandon Sanderson. Jenn Lyons has her own style, her own type of world building, which I am thoroughly enjoying. And I mean, I'm already 2 books in. I'm about to read book 3, so we are here for this. But that is it for my review. Overall, I thoroughly enjoyed this book. I really recommend that you guys check out the series. I will also leave a link to Piera's video. I saw that she did a video review because I was on YouTube looking up other people's reviews, and a lot of the reviews that I saw, a lot of people didn't enjoy it. But I know that Piera posted a video up, so I will leave her link. You can click the I above to go to her video, and or click down in the description. I will also have another person's review that I saw as well. Those 2 reviews reviews will probably help you a little bit more than mine. I'm still getting used to this whole video review sort of setup and the style. But like I said, I wanted to give enough information that wasn't spoilery but wasn't too vague at the same time, and use the call out system. But yeah, that is it for this video. If you have read this book, let me know your thoughts, whether you liked it, what you didn't like, if you did love it, what you loved about it. Let me know your thoughts, because I definitely want to get this book out there. I think it is a great read. I think a lot of people should read it. And that's pretty much it for this video. So I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.